Hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Tucker is given a surprise when Howarth's appearance is revealed. The shock of Roger Howarth's arrival in Genoa City as the newly reimagined Tucker McCall sent waves through every corner of the narrative, as if the writers had deliberately chosen to take the story into a labyrinth of unexpected turns and disorienting emotional reveals. And the beauty of it was not just that the casting was surprising, but that the essence of Howarth's acting style brought an entirely different energy to Tucker, one that instantly made audiences reconsider every move, every intention, and every line of dialogue this character would deliver. For whereas before Tucker had been a man defined largely by his shady business practices, complicated romantic entanglements, and father-son tension with Devon Hamilton, now he carried an unpredictability rooted in Howarth's distinctive capacity to oscillate between charm, menace, humor, and vulnerability in a single breath, creating a version of Tucker who was not simply the sum of his history but rather a combustible blend of that past with a present infused by fresh vitality. And this shift became evident from the very first scene where he emerged, walking into society with an unassuming air, his hair slightly tousled, his expression hovering between mischief and intensity, catching everyone, including longtime viewers, off guard. For the dialogue itself was simple enough, a casual greeting aimed at Phyllis and a sly smirk thrown at Jack, yet Howarth's delivery transformed it into something electric, as if he knew secrets no one else did and was daring the others to figure them out, and that essence of danger wrapped in charisma immediately set the stage for conflicts that would ripple outward in countless directions, drawing in the Abbotts, the Newmans, the Winters family, and of course Devon, whose reaction upon seeing his father's new demeanor was a mixture of skepticism, irritation, and a curious spark of admiration he couldn't quite suppress, because this Tucker was different. This Tucker was disarmingly magnetic, and Devon, always striving to balance loyalty to family with independence in business, suddenly found himself wondering whether aligning with Tucker might not be as toxic as before, and therein lay the first domino of a sprawling story arc in which alliances blurred, trust was tested, and legacies were reshaped. For Tucker's energy under Howarth's embodiment was that of a trickster savant, a man who thrived on chaos but disguised it with elegance, a man who might destroy a corporation one day and rescue a family member the next, leaving everyone perpetually unsure of whether he was savior or saboteur. And this constant guessing game pulled the audience deeper, forcing them to analyze every nuance and anticipate explosions in the most ordinary conversations, because what Howarth mastered was the art of making silence dangerous. His pauses, his sidelong glances, his sudden bursts of intensity all carried the weight of possible revelation, as if at any moment he might rip away a veil and expose a truth so devastating it could change the entire landscape of Genoa City. And indeed the writers leaned into this by scripting Tucker into collisions that felt almost fated, starting with Jack Abbott, who has long been positioned as both rival and reluctant ally depending on circumstance, and Howarth's Tucker, rather than simply sparring with Jack in boardrooms, invaded Jack's personal psyche by insinuating he knew things about Jack's insecurities, his family's fractures, his own self-doubt as Jabot's leader, pushing buttons with surgical precision and leaving Jack fuming but oddly rattled, because this Tucker wasn't playing by old rules. He was inventing new ones, destabilizing the established power dynamics, and while Jack tried to brush him off, viewers could sense that Tucker was planting seeds that would sprout into major confrontations down the line, perhaps even threatening the Abbott legacy in ways Victor Newman himself could never quite manage. Since Victor's wars with Jack are familiar territory, but Tucker's reinvention made him a wild card, an X-factor whose unpredictability meant nothing was safe, not Jabot, not Chancellor Winters, not Newman Enterprises, and especially not the fragile personal relationships that tethered the core families together. For when Tucker turned his attention to Ashley Abbott, his former flame and perpetual weakness, the chemistry shifted dramatically, with Howarth layering the interactions with an undercurrent of regret and longing that was far less about manipulation and more about genuine ache, an ache that Ashley, despite her hardened defenses, could not entirely ignore, and thus the story injected a renewed romantic tension into the plot, giving viewers the sense that Ashley might, against her better judgment, open herself again to a man who has broken her before, because this version of Tucker seemed capable of growth, of remorse, of yearning to be seen beyond his mistakes, and yet, lurking beneath that vulnerability was still the glint of cunning that made it impossible to fully trust him, And so Ashley was drawn into a dance of attraction and suspicion, a classic soap opera push and pull elevated by Howarth's ability to complicate every gesture. When he brushed Ashley's arm, was it tenderness or manipulation? Was it genuine or just a ruse to let her down when he expressed regret? And the audience found themselves equally torn, rooting for redemption one moment and warning Ashley to run the next. And this duality defined Howarth's Tucker across every storyline, making him a character who could pivot from villain to hero within a single scene, as in his interactions with Devon, where one moment he'd offer heartfelt fatherly advice and the next he'd reveal a scheme that could jeopardize Devon's hard-won stability, creating an ongoing tension where Devon had to wrestle not only with his distrust of Tucker but also with his own desire for paternal connection, a desire he rarely admitted aloud but which Howarth's performance made painfully visible. And it was in these father-son dynamics that the surprise casting choice paid off most richly, because Howarth's capacity for emotional transparency cracked open layers of Tucker previously underexplored, showing flashes of a man desperate for reconciliation even as he sabotaged himself with pride and deceit, and this conflict reverberated outward to Devon's relationship with Abby, who watched the unfolding drama with wariness, fearing the impact on her family, while also being forced to question her own loyalties given her ties to both the Abbott and Newman empires, and
so the web of intrigue thickened, with Tucker at the center like a spider spinning silk threads that connected everyone, some threads sticky with deception, others glittering with the possibility of redemption, and each episode built upon the last with subtle shifts in tone, a smirk here, a heartfelt plea there, until viewers were left marveling at how seamlessly Howarth had reshaped Tucker into one of the most compelling figures in Genoa City, someone who could believably charm Nicky Newman at a cocktail party, intimidate Adam Newman in a backroom negotiation, clash with Billy Abbott over corporate strategy, and still find time to whisper apologies to Ashley in moments of quiet intimacy, and all of this built toward the looming question that kept audiences hooked: was Tucker here to rebuild, to reconcile, to redeem himself, or was he here to burn everything down in one last grand gesture of chaos? And the beauty of Howarth's portrayal was that both possibilities felt equally plausible, equally thrilling, equally dangerous, leaving not just the characters but the viewers themselves in a state of delicious uncertainty, the hallmark of great soap opera storytelling. And as weeks turned into months, the ripple effects of his arrival only deepened, creating storylines where Victor Newman suddenly saw Tucker not as a pawn but as a rival worthy of respect, where Jack Abbott realized that defeating Tucker might require alliances with unlikely partners, where Devon struggled between rejecting and embracing his father, where Ashley wrestled with her heart versus her mind, and where the younger generation, Summer, Kyle, Mariah, Tessa, watched in fascination as Tucker redefined what power, love, and family could look like in Genoa City. And through it all the undeniable truth remained: Roger Howarth's surprise appearance had not just brought Tucker back, it had reinvented him, elevating him into a force of nature whose every move demanded attention, whose every word carried weight, and whose every silence promised that the greatest shocks were still to come. What truly amplified the electricity of Howarth stepping into the shoes of Tucker McCall was not just the way he altered the dynamics with his immediate circle, Devon, Ashley, Jack, but how his unpredictable energy began bleeding into storylines that at first glance seemed unrelated, pulling characters like Phyllis Summers, Diane Jenkins, and even Sharon Newman into his gravitational orbit. And this was because Howarth's Tucker exuded that peculiar quality of being both a disruptor and a confidant, someone you could imagine whispering secrets into the ear of a lonely soul at Crimson Lights one moment and then blowing up a billion-dollar business deal the next. And the writers cleverly exploited this by scripting him into moments where he was physically present but seemingly peripheral, only for his few words or subtle body language to spark major revelations. Like when he casually mentioned to Phyllis that sometimes survival meant embracing one's inner darkness, a line tossed off as if in jest but which resonated with Phyllis so deeply that she carried it into her next clash with Diane, subtly shifting her strategy from overt aggression to sly patience, thereby changing the trajectory of a feud that had been spiraling in circles for months. And this was emblematic of the way Howarth's Tucker functioned. He was the stone thrown into the pond, his ripples touching shores far removed from the original splash, and nowhere was this clearer than in his quiet interactions with Victor Newman, for Victor, long the patriarchal puppet master of Genoa City, found himself unnerved not by Tucker's power or wealth, but by his refusal to play the old games, because Howarth gave Tucker a quality of enjoying unpredictability, of thriving on subversion, and Victor, a man who prides himself on control, sensed in Tucker someone who could not be predicted, corralled, or bought. And thus their rivalry became less about specific deals and more about philosophy, Victor seeking order through domination, Tucker seeking freedom through chaos, and every conversation between them became a duel not of facts but of wills, with viewers glued to the screen to see which Titan would blink first. And in the meantime, the younger generation of Newmans and Abbotts, Kyle, Summer, Adam, Abby, watched these exchanges like students at the feet of masters, each of them interpreting Tucker's presence through the lens of their own ambitions, with Adam admiring the audacity and trying to emulate it, Abby distrusting it but secretly understanding it given her own struggles with divided loyalties, Kyle eyeing it as a potential threat to Jabot, and Summer caught between the allure of Tucker's rebellious aura and the loyalty she felt to her family, and thus Howarth's Tucker was not merely a character but a catalyst, reshaping the younger generation as much as the veterans, forcing them to reconsider who they were and what they wanted in a world suddenly destabilized by his return. And what made this even more compelling was the way the writers leaned into Howarth's trademark skill of emotional duality, giving Tucker moments of startling tenderness, like when he overheard Mariah and Tessa worrying about Arya's future and, instead of dismissing them as irrelevant to his plans, he surprised them with an almost paternal reassurance that children needed roots and wings, advice that carried such sincerity that it left them momentarily speechless, and audiences too, because this was the same man who, only hours earlier, had threatened to sabotage a Newman board vote if Victor didn't bend to his will, and that tension, between the ruthless corporate raider and the quietly aching man yearning for connection, created an ongoing unpredictability that made every storyline he touched vibrate with suspense, and the layering continued as Howarth's Tucker wove into the arc of Chance Chancellor, who, already struggling with his place in the world after leaving the police force, found himself oddly mirrored in Tucker's restless spirit, for while Chance sought purpose through law and service, Tucker seemed to embody the question of what happens when one rejects all order, and in a late-night scene at Society the two men shared bourbon and exchanged philosophies, Chance confessing that he sometimes felt unmoored, Tucker smirking and saying being unmoored was the only way to know you were truly alive, and though the moment passed, it planted a seed in Chance that would later influence decisions about his career and his relationships, again underscoring how Howarth's version of Tucker wasn't just a character but a thematic device, an agent of transformation across the canvas. And as these ripple effects multiplied, the looming question grew louder: was Tucker destined for redemption or ruin, for a permanent role as mentor and disruptor in Genoa City, or for a spectacular self-destruction that would take half the town down with him? And the brilliance of Howarth's interpretation was that either outcome felt equally believable, equally earned, and equally tantalizing, so that every time he appeared on screen, viewers leaned forward, bracing themselves for impact, knowing that whatever came next, it would not be small, it would not be safe, and it would not be forgettable. And as the weeks rolled on, Howarth's Tucker wasn't just colliding with the business titans and the family legacies, he began seeping into the emotional undercurrents of characters who hadn't crossed paths with Tucker in years, characters like Sharon Newman, who at first dismissed him as another charming manipulator with an agenda but who gradually found herself intrigued by the vulnerability that flickered behind his eyes. For Sharon, always a healer, recognized the brokenness within him, and their quiet exchanges over coffee at Crimson Lights became some of the most unexpectedly magnetic scenes, not because they hinted at romance necessarily, though that possibility lingered in the air, but because Sharon's grounding energy gave Tucker the rare chance to lower his armor, and the audience witnessed Howarth's mastery as he let Tucker's carefully controlled bravado soften, his voice dropping, his gaze growing distant as he admitted the loneliness of being both desired and despised in equal measure, a confession that struck Sharon deeply and gave her a storyline beyond simply supporting others, as she now had to question whether her instinct to nurture might drag her into dangerous territory with a man who could just as easily shatter her as he could cherish her. And simultaneously Tucker's influence crept into Billy Abbott's restless psyche, for Billy, always drawn to chaos, saw in Tucker a kindred spirit, someone who thrived on risk and disruption, and the writers played with this by scripting late-night strategy sessions where Billy found himself half admiring, half envying Tucker's refusal to follow rules, and as their conversations deepened, an unholy alliance began to form, one that threatened to destabilize not only Jabot but Billy's own fragile stability, since aligning with Tucker meant embracing his darker impulses rather than resisting them, and this scared Lily, who had just begun to trust Billy again, forcing her into conflict not only with Billy but with Tucker himself, and those confrontations crackled with energy because Lily, unlike many others, refused to be intimidated by Tucker's games, calling him out for the pain he caused Devon, for the manipulations he wielded like weapons, and Howarth's Tucker responded not with bluster but with unsettling calm, smirking as if to say her outrage only proved he had struck a nerve, further intensifying the emotional chessboard that now had Lily as a frontline player. And while all this unfolded, Tucker's past with Ashley Abbott continued to cast a long shadow, and Ashley herself began spiraling into an emotional war within, torn between her determination to reject Tucker's reformed act and the undeniable spark that flared whenever he was near, and in scenes thick with longing and resentment, Howarth let Tucker's eyes linger just a beat too long, his touch hover a second too close, until the tension snapped and Ashley, against her better judgment, succumbed to a kiss that reignited old flames, sending her family into uproar and giving Jack one more reason to despise Tucker, though what made the storyline more riveting was that Tucker's affection seemed genuine, layered with regret and yearning, and so the viewers themselves were split, unsure whether to root for redemption or scream warnings at Ashley, and the uncertainty was delicious, soap opera storytelling at its finest, and while Ashley wrestled with her heart, Victor Newman found himself in a rare state of unease. Because Tucker, unlike Adam, Nick, or even Jack, represented a different kind of threat, not one driven solely by business or revenge but by an almost philosophical drive to dismantle control structures, and Victor, whose entire identity is rooted in control, realized too late that Tucker's very unpredictability was his power, leading to scenes where Victor tried to trap Tucker in classic schemes only to find Tucker had anticipated him, turning the tables with unnerving ease, and this forced Victor to admit, if only to himself, that he might finally have met an opponent he couldn't fully master, which in turn rattled Nikki and Victoria, who worried about Victor's health and stability, particularly as his obsession with outmaneuvering Tucker grew, and Victoria, already scarred by her father's manipulations, found herself oddly curious about Tucker's defiance, sensing in him a rebel spirit she both distrusted and admired, and this curiosity threatened to blur the lines of allegiance. Within the Newman family, even as Devon struggled with his own tug-of-war, torn between his instinct to reject his father and his buried desire to believe in him, leading to powerful confrontations where Devon accused Tucker of manipulation only to be met with unexpected tears in his father's eyes, moments that blurred the line between sincerity and performance, leaving Devon shaken and viewers enthralled, because Howarth's gift was making every scene feel like a coin flip between truth and lie, forcing the audience to live in suspense. And the ripple effects of his presence even reached characters like Chloe and Chelsea, who speculated about Tucker's motives with the kind of gossip that spreads like wildfire, infecting every corner of Genoa City until it felt as though no storyline could remain untouched. And this was the genius of introducing Howarth as Tucker. He didn't just arrive, he rewired the show, making himself essential in ways that redefined every relationship, every rivalry, and every romance, so that fans found themselves eagerly awaiting each scene not simply to see what Tucker would do, but to see how the world around him would bend and break in response. And as Tucker's presence dug deeper into the fabric of Genoa City, the reverberations became impossible to ignore, spreading from the glossy corporate boardrooms to the intimate domestic spaces where families fought, reconciled, and broke apart, for this new version of Tucker, infused with Roger Howarth's mercurial energy, was not content to remain in predictable lanes, instead crashing into lives like a storm that seemed to both destroy and renew, so that even characters who had once dismissed Tucker as irrelevant now found themselves questioning their futures under the weight of his shadow, such as Nate Hastings, who initially saw Tucker as nothing more than a dangerous manipulator but quickly realized that Tucker's unorthodox approach to business, his willingness to play outside the rigid rules, resonated with Nate's own ambitions, creating a dangerous temptation where Nate began secretly weighing whether to align with Tucker over the Newmans, sparking conflict with Victoria who, despite her curiosity about Tucker, could not abide disloyalty, and this created a triangle of shifting allegiances that blurred lines between personal attraction, business ambition, and moral compromise, and while that played out in the corporate world, Audra Charles found herself in the middle of Tucker's storm as well, because Audra had been a loyal confidant, schemer, and sometimes partner in his machinations. But this new Tucker, layered with Howarth's blend of charm and menace, no longer treated her as a subordinate. He treated her as a mirror, someone who could either reflect his own darker instincts or betray him at the worst possible moment, and their scenes began crackling with a sexual tension that hovered between mutual respect and imminent betrayal, leaving Audra to wonder whether she was finally in over her head, because while she prided herself on her cunning, Tucker's unpredictability unnerved her in ways she didn't admit, and this uncertainty gave her storyline teeth. As she began confiding in Kyle Abbott, of all people, using Tucker's looming shadow as a wedge to get closer to Kyle and manipulate her way further into Abbott territory, creating a fresh collision between Tucker and Kyle that wasn't about business strategy alone but about pride, loyalty, and personal betrayal. And in this swirl of machinations, characters like Elena Dawson, who often floated on the periphery of larger dramas, suddenly found themselves pulled in, as Elena overheard conversations and found herself becoming a reluctant truth-teller, warning Devon that his father was still dangerous, which strained her already fragile relationship with him and pushed Devon into an even deeper spiral of doubt, isolation, and longing, leaving him ripe for manipulation. And Howarth's Tucker played these moments like a virtuoso, one moment offering Devon the raw honesty of a wounded father, tears welling, voice cracking with desperation, and the next moment twisting the knife with a cold reminder that business and family were inseparable.